based on whatever expectations or the ideology the white group in question have. So if you take that power away from them, where they're also subject to other groups of people's power, then that's frightening. So now the academy, and you're exactly right. So the academy now says, well, this conversation is off limits. So I teach in the philosophy department. So we teach just war theory. We teach military ethics. We teach histories of revolution. We teach Hobbes, right? This is the basis of Hobbes' philosophical anthropology, right? He's in the middle of a war, so everybody's out to kill everybody. Social contract saves you from that. We could teach all this stuff, but I teach Robert F. Williams. Oh no, right? And see, this is what I think Bowman gets to, right? Is that the denying being, right? The wretchedness of the position of the subject trying to write about that wretchedness is a break with the whole conceptual scheme. The issue that scares white people is not that I actually said we should go kill all white people, because that's fanatic language. Right? Because think about it. If that was really the argument, then you can just dismiss this black guy as crazy. The Chronicle wouldn't have sided with a black guy of all people that just said go out and kill white people. It's not what was said. But to say that violence has a very specific use in the history of black people thinking about liberation, where white life could be contingent because black life is worth more, that's the scary part. The scary part is that we could imagine a notion of blackness that doesn't seek to simply be equal with whiteness. And this is the problem that I have with a lot of what I call comparative discourse about racism. You simultaneously say that whiteness is evil and that white people have built up systems that are based on the dehumanization of black folk, brown folk, immigrants, etc. And then you come back and say, but we want those exact same rights. We want that version of humanity. I want to be equal to that which oppresses us. And I work from a position where I say blackness is possibility. That fracturing the ontology of whiteness, the definitions of the human, allows blackness to grow in ways that allow the world to change. And sometimes that has to start with violence as well as other types of thought. But we don't know if revolution is the way to do that. We don't know if it's armed resistance. We don't know, right? We don't have any map to tell us the way the world's going to lay out. But the problem is that we can't think it. Mm-hmm. Right, and see that's what I think. Right. That's why I think Bowman is pointing to the constraints of the academic language and the canon itself.
But the fear of the thinking person focused on this kind of issue, mm-hmm. Of course, would be frightening beyond the other possibilities for violence that are normally heavily scripted or programmed,
because those are reactions
according to certain contexts.
Yes, yeah.
Like there may be a breakout in this or that context, mm-hmm. but one can't easily imagine how thought will travel. The idea
right.
of the violence.
Yeah.
We don't know how far you're going to travel
right.
in your mind around these sorts of issues. Now, you said something before about, I wonder if the fear, nonetheless the fear throughout the country, mm-hmm. like including Oregon, that mm-hmm. district which I'm just finding out about. Sorry, Katie, but I just...
white supremacist state.
Yeah. None of y'all need a plug. This is not what we're doing here. I wonder if that fear is not always there, though.
No, I think it is.
And in fact helps to explain some of the pathology. Mm-hmm. And then one thinks, especially of the South, the way in which the soil itself mm-hmm. is just enriched by the blood.
Absolutely.
It's a kind of haunting. So it's sort of Texas A&M seems like a pile-on mm-hmm. around these things. Like, how otherwise would it happen? Where otherwise might it happen? I mean, there are a few other places. But there's just so much coming together there.
But when Richard Spencer went there, he was talking about the blood and bones and the soul and the ground of Texas. Right? That's not by accident. And see, this is why I study 19th century ethnology, because you see the history of Nazism, you see the history of de Gobineau's theory of of colonization, right? The domino is interesting. I mean, we always talk about the inequality of races, oh, it's just racism. But if you read the whole book, the domino is making this point that when you colonize a land, you don't give it to people who don't look like the people that colonize. He's like, you set up institutions, you set up histories, you set up the very layout of the land to represent the colonizing force. And that's what Spencer was talking about. He's like, look, when we took over Texas and basically committed genocide, our blood and bones is here, so we own this land. Mm-hmm. Now, that's fascinating because that also means that the thought that he's talking about suggests that the complexion, the pigmentation of the people who died for it should be the people who live on it. He's like, that's the price that we've paid. This is old thought that's just put in a pretty package. And I tell people this is the danger of Spencer. The danger of Spencer isn't that he's a racist. The danger of Spencer is that he's actually trying to evolve white supremacy into an intellectual discourse. And this is going to resonate. And see, they're not stupid. They're not stupid. They're fanatics. They're racist, but they're not stupid. Because he understands that the discursive impact of what he's doing is going to resonate for generations in the minds of the people that he gets to buy into. Even the white liberal or moderate will now assimilate some aspect of an ethno-nationalist agenda because it's become part of the discursive conversation in the academy in the 21st century. That's the power of what they're doing. So then why are they attacking academic freedom, especially in the South? Why is this fear being assimilated throughout the country? Because now it's a platform of thought. The alt-right's the fringe group. But now even liberal white America is like, well, are we losing the country? Now the moderate says, well, should we vote this way or that way? I do kind of think maybe they have a point. You see, it's created a new boundary of the rationalization now. And we're not responding to that. We still think that this is a debate about, oh, surely we all agree that Trump's racist. And now people are like, well, yeah, but... And look at the media. Look at the media. The argument is everything he's doing is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But the ridiculous is now quotidian. It's a daily thing. Mm-hmm. So now what if people say, oh, well, we expect this. And the same time he's doing this, what do you see happening at the local level? You're seeing young people protest, and you're seeing a crackdown by administrators, managers, adults on whether or not they should have the free speech to do that. Threatening young people saying you'll be expelled, right? That you shouldn't be able to have protests, that you shouldn't be able to have this free speech. See, the regime is not just about policing bodies, it's also about policing thought. And what we've done, and this is what, this is the piece of my work that I think, people are not very comfortable with, is I've tried to explain to people that the history of American democracy has not been the expansion of ideas, but the expansion of racial phobics. That you socialize the citizens of America, when you become a citizen of America, when you've internalized the notion of a phobia against certain groups who are not American or who you deem as alien. And that's what Trump's done. Trump's had the ability to coalesce a group of white Americans around the idea that some people just don't belong here. Yeah. And what we've done is we've let that now sneak into the academic language. And we're trying to disarm it, right? There's a goodwill of academics trying to disarm the language, but we don't have the right tools. Because the theories that were developed, the Foucauldian analysis, the way that we read Fanon, right? The way that we read Du Bois, wasn't equipped to do that. We didn't get those theories because they were actually challenging white supremacists. We got those theories because we were actually trying to break down white supremacy and get multicultural integrationist equality. See, that's why we read the theories of Fanon and the theories of Newton when they wrote them, because they were fighting against white supremacy and segregationists. That's why it's so radical. Right? They're not worried about whether they're not going to get academic jobs because they couldn't get academic jobs. So it's a non-issue. Right? Du Bois produced what he produced large part outside the academy, and the other part in black institutions in the academy. And now they read him 100 years later, but they wouldn't hire him at the places that we're doing now. So to point out the criticism or to criticize other black scholars for not engaging in that concrete project seems silly given the history of why we know that we got in precisely because these are not as radical. And then to have a conversation that's radical, or at least in my view, concrete and real, which is just a question of, gosh, maybe people who get killed without doing anything should defend themselves, sparks You know, it's unbelievable. How could a black man say this? And then what's even more interesting is that my conversation just doesn't stop there. My work with black men takes it a step farther. Because what I'm interested in then is, why do you see the policing in terms of Muslim men, Mexican men, black men, of these kind of genocidal logics of death? Right? Why are we killing all these men? And my argument becomes ultimately because we're invested in a notion of racism that's about population, which is why these white supremacists are trying to act against white women's bodies. So they outlaw abortion, they're rolling back health because they want them to have babies. While white supremacists are, I think they call it stealthing. Your job now is to impregnate white women. Right? This stuff is not new. This stuff happens every time racial regimes want to become more ethno-nationalistic, because they need babies, you need bodies. And again, this is not the way we look at racism. You know, when the white women go put on the pink hats, they think they're marching for rights. They actually think that that's what's under attack. They understand that the argument is their womb. That's how white supremacy generates itself.
It's actually not only white, it was very multiracial.
Yeah,
To be fair.
I understand. But there was also some debates about
Yes.
the role and, you know, where white women stepped in and out in terms of siding with black and brown women. So,
Well, I know, Tommy, I won't be forgiven if I don't provide some time for the general exchange with folks. So I got lots of issues and questions, maybe another time. But let's give our group the opportunity to engage you directly. So, Susanna, did you get it out?
Yes,
Can we move on? Okay, all right.
yeah. No, we can discuss that more if you like.
Okay,
that's fine.
all right. All right. Others who want to comment, raise their hand? Leif, jump in.
Yeah, I guess, so the idea that violence is part of the picture, and that it's part of the picture not just as something going off the rails, but actually, however painful and difficult, well, however out of control it always is, it's how something happens in the direction of something else.
Yes.
And to imagine, whether you're talking ethics, whether you're talking political philosophy, or whether you're talking the good, right? To imagine that you could do that without, in a concrete and practical way, without somehow getting the question of violence in there as part of the conversation. And then, of course, that still leaves you lots of room to nuance.
Of course,
You
of
know,
course.
you can't, like, it's not just saying, shoot everybody
No,
you see, right?
no,
But it's
no.
someone saying, if you're not talking violence as part of the picture, you're not talking reality.
Exactly.
That's how I'm hearing it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
And so it takes me to Walter Benjamin's critique of violence as, on the one hand, saying, if you think violence is not what the state does, and most of that essay is about, you know, paying attention to all the ways in which it's already in the picture, it's already normal.
Yeah.
So, and whether you are, creating it or reforming it or whatever.
Sure.
And of course, so now I'm just interested in having you talk about your notion of kind of black violence and self-defense vis-a-vis Benjamin's notion of messianic violence as, or die reine Gewalt, the pure violence, right? This eschatological concept.
Right.
Just to kind of, what do you do with that in your
Well,
philosophical?
I think that, well, I'll try to, because there's a lot we could talk about in both sides. But let me say this. So when you were mentioning Benjamin, I was thinking of Huey P. Newton, you know, War on the Panthers, which is dissertation. And he makes this really important distinction. He says that, you know, we come to believe that the state is not invested in violence because we've given the power to commit violence against certain dissident groups to the state. So that civil society gets to pretend that it's nonviolent, given that it's handed that authority over. So we all get to pretend that we're civilized, right? That's how I kind of think about black violence. That what do you do in a world where violence has been, or the power to perpetrate violence has been given to an entity that acts with the legitimacy of, say, white citizens or various citizens in the United States, but they have the ability to disown it because it's that violence and not them. So I think that that differs in a sense from true violence or the eschatological problems of violence, or even the use of violence towards, Providence or something, right? Because black violence has never been used as a way to, well, I guess black liberation theology has some instances of this, but you don't see the tradition usually of black violence trying to realize a new world for some, unclaimed racial imaginary, right? When you look at white violence, the expansion in the West, the genocide of the indigenous people, that's part of a teleology towards some destiny. That these are lesser people, hence they shouldn't have the land. These are lesser people, so they should not have existed, right? Black people are utilizing violence to try to stop the imposition of that logic on them as a group of people that they think should not exist. So that's why I think that black resistance or black militancy, which hasn't always been violent, right? But has used violence strategically. And this was Robert F. Williams' point, that we can use nonviolence when we can and should, but in the times where we can't, then we have to at least defend ourselves, right? To deny that seems to me to be the epitome of racism.
Well, what about Wright's work on violence?
Richard Wright, Jeremiah Wright.
Yeah, Richard. I mean, not a movement, to be sure,
right.
But he did, opine, theorize.
Well, look, I think if we're thinking about the same piece, are we thinking about the novel or the essays?
Well, the novel, I would say,
Okay,
his
yeah.
characters, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, because he makes that comment in, I forgot the essay where he talks about violence always been present in the colonial situation because it's a expression of sexual excess. Look, I think Richard Wright, I actually wrote a piece on Wright where he's talking about the rape of Willie McGee. I think Wright has varying views of violence, depending if you're reading Black Boy versus, some of his later work like 8 Men, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in the first that violence is both a coping mechanism and a creative force in Black Boy, right? Because you get the use of violence to reclaim something lost, or really it's more of a transference that you get violence imposed on a black male body and then it kind of flows through it to other beings. But I don't think many people read Black Boy in that way because they're so caught up on the figure of the black male that they don't see kind of the transference of societal violence through his entity. I think when you get to his later work that you really see in Wright this ability of black men to try to cope and resist it. So when you look at how he writes certain characters, what's the short story where he has the black man dress up as a woman to get a job? So I write about this story because I said it's very similar to Willie McGee. So what ends up happening, I forget the title, which is terrible given that I just posted this essay. But there's a situation, the wife is working, he's a black man, can't get a job, nobody wants to take him, he's serving in the military, was a cook. So he puts on his wife's dress, they hire him as a maid. He takes the job as a domestic worker. The white husband tries to rape him, right? The white wife says, well, the husband's basically a rapist, we know this, but just fight him off, right? End of the story, the white woman comes in, finds him trying to rape her. They find out that it's a man. The husband says, oh, it's a nigger, shoot him. We'll just claim he was trying to rape you when he was trying to rape him. And then the black man ends up shot, survives, but gets the $200 or $300 necessary to save the home of his family. And Baldwin reads this in Wright and says, Wright's matured as a writer and as a thinker in the use of violence in black manhood. But what's fascinating to me about how I think about the violence as a kind of transference in Black Boy and how we think of the violence here is that notice that it shows in this instance around the black male body that violence is not only a destructive force, but a transfiguring force, right? That it impairs the being, it contours the being, it constrains the being of oppressed groups of people. So much so that the wife at the end of the story says, it's not easy for a black man to exist in a dress as a woman, is it? So you see, the way that we think about violence, because think about what we're doing in this society, right? Violence changes what we think. It's not just the physical killing of black or brown peoples or Muslims. It's not just the censoring of thought. It changes what can be said or thought. How we actually enact different behaviors in the world. So I think that Wright, at the end, especially in that piece, does a very good job of showing how white supremacist violence, specifically regarding black men, is not just emasculating or effeminizing, but it's negating, it's dehumanizing in such a way that you have to act differently in the world. And I think that this is what's happening in the United States. When we talk about violence, we literally think about it only as an exchange of life and death. But we're not talking about violence as a socializing force. What do people not say, or how do people not behave to preserve their lives, to preserve their careers? Because think about it, after this situation happened, I haven't seen very many essays over the last year and a half published about political violence, right? Because nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to alt-right. And this is why I say it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Even under the ethno-nationalism that we see in America now, how many black scholars have come out on the back and made very public statements or written language that's attacking the regime of Donald Trump or these institutions as white supremacy? There's been very few. Much of our discourse over the last 6 to 12 months has been about sexism. It's been about female bodies and female vulnerability. I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm saying look at the dynamic that you have KKK, white supremacists, neo-fascists, killing, deporting, etc. And there's been very little work that academics feel safe in doing around those issues, at least publicly, because you know what the effect's going to be. You're going to be censored, you're going to be attacked. And when you've had these kind of public displays of humiliation around scholars that are doing anti-racist work, I mean, they attacked the white woman up in Minnesota, Dr. Cloud, for even making the point about how, these figures weren't initially white. I mean, think about the psychologism of this. This is an argument that is completely rooted in the superiority complex of even poor white people. Because these are white people who are adamantly against education, that are using violence, that violence empowers them to spread their ideas as if they're authorities. So we have a whole lot of work to do around the effects of violence in this country that I don't think that we're seriously taking up. Because these people who are outside the university, people who in any other era we would think are simply, at the bottom, like the people that constitute the Tea Party, Appalachians, right? People who we know exist in conditions very similar to what they think most black and brown folk exist in this country. There is no distinction, right? It's like when you read To Kill a Mockingbird and you have the white family, right? Say, we're not like black people, we're not niggers, but they lived in the house that black people moved out of, but they still thought they were better because they're white, right? That's what we're dealing with in this country. And that superiority is not based on the delusion of white supremacy. It's based in the violence that these white people en masse inflict on other groups and can inflict, given that the political platform of the government is now in line with their interests. We have to start doing some serious work about that. Violence is not just about the life and death. It's about how they're predicting and dictating certain behaviors and thoughts.
Okay, let's see. Anyone else want to chime in? Questions, comments?
I wonder what practically universities can do to, because the threat of violence has to be, I would imagine, treated seriously. What it sounds like your department was supportive, but the administration.
Right.
I mean, what kinds of actions or structures or systems could the academy put in place so that kind of the kinds of thinking that you're talking about could happen?
Well, I think universities have to accept that under this administration that they're going to have to be safe havens. The same way that you had this issue during McCarthyism, right? There have to be safe havens of academic freedom. Academic freedom and tenure came about precisely for these issues, and I think universities are turning their back on that because of donors and potential conflicts at the state level. And when I say safe havens, I mean there needs to be statements, there needs to be resources, legal counsel, et cetera. There needs to be action plans surrounding the protection of professors, their families and children, relocation packages, things of this sort. Because this stuff is not stopping. I was among one of the first, and I think one of the most visible scholars attacked, by this. But what ended up happening is that I think the Chronicle said maybe last month that over 100 scholars were attacked by the alt-right last year. And if I got attacked in May, and I think it was like the first or second, maybe third, and you had 100 more, right? I mean, that tells you about where this is going. So I think universities kind of have to buck up, so to speak, and say, you see, and I say that because this is interesting. This is going to end, right? This is going to end. Like, there is no ethno-nationalism flares up unless this wants to become a repressive regime, right? This is going to have to end. Especially with these people coming out of high school and getting sick of gun violence. Like, in 10 years, the world's going to look very different as a response to this. Much more conflicted, but still very different. So the question becomes, how are universities going to be remembered, right? And see, that's the piece. Administrators are business people, so they're like, we'll be gone. But what? I'm serious. What Texas A&M did is forever going to be part of the institutional history that black scholars are going to have, that other people of color are going to have. And in a world where that changes, in a world where that becomes written about in somebody's history book, who is reflecting on this moment and goes back and says, oh, how did a black scholar, a black full professor, or the youngest black full professor in his discipline, how is that going to be remembered 10, 15 years from now? So I think universities have to start looking at the long game. If you have scholars that are fighting, and that's what people are doing right now. That's what this group's doing, right? If you have people that are fighting to preserve the intellectual integrity of some form of humanity, right? Then universities are going to have to protect that. And if they're not, then that means that the scholars that we're talking about are going to have to create alternative spaces and alternative programs to do so. And I think that that's the work that a lot of scholars don't want to do, because we get very comfortable in our tenure track positions, right? Because, it's easy to say, look, it's just easier for me to be quiet and just publish something else. But then at the same time, we claim that we're these revolutionaries that care about the world, et cetera. The reason I said what I said is because I saw Jamie Foxx getting thrown under the bus, and a whole lot of black people who were celebrating the movie being depicted as dangerous to society. So I said we needed to have a real conversation about what this means. And my university decided, well, despite the fact that this is based in history and literature, we're going to take the side of basically white supremacists, right? So universities have to become very clear, and if universities don't do it, faculty and professional organizations have to become very clear and start pooling resources. Because the reality of the situation is that you're going to have some people that leave town. A good colleague of mine, Johnny Williams at Trinity, had to leave town, and he's adamant. Like, he shared a hashtag that was talking about the death of white supremacy, and they took that out of context, saying he was talking about killing white people. Like, it can't be, just think about it logically. It can't be the case that every person that they've attacked really believes that you should go kill white people. Because some of these are white people. This is the ridiculousness of the propaganda program. It's trying to say that all anti-racism is about distinguishing of white people and white life. Because that's their program. Diversity is about killing white people. And this is just the program. Universities are like, yeah, that's a good point. I think that we need to respect their free speech, right? Like, and that's what I mean when I say that this is what I mean when I say that white supremacy has become a part of the intellectual range in America.
But why
That
did
even
it
you,
become? It was already. Universities as a form of academic plantations has been around for longer.
oh, absolutely. But look at but you have a population now. You have a population that's now feeding that on the social sphere. Right? Universities have always been racist, right? That's what we're always fighting against. They've always been institutionally conservative, right? But there's a rhetoric of diversity. Now you have a political platform and a majority of young people in the alt-right, because they're not all old, that are energizing people to say, yeah, you're right, diversity is dangerous. Diversity is the killing of the white race. And universities are now saying, well, yeah, we were racist before, but this alt-right thing may actually benefit us. So that's what I think is the difference, right? It's the energy. You got bodies now. You have a new clientele, right? You have a new clientele, and I think that that's what we're running up against.
But at the same time, we have the infrastructures that exist, and if I think about my own academic context, I would say most of the white faculty, they are cowering behind their desks, basically.
Well, yeah.
In total fear and feel disempowered by the neoliberal, technocratic, corporate-driven environment to begin with. So now on top of that, you get
The ethno-nationalists.
the ethno-nationalist, neo-Nazi kind of militia movement coming to campus. You know,
Right.
they're just afraid